Most Star Wars fans have some level of familiarity with the 7 forms of lightsaber combat, the primary fighting styles of the Jedi. But there's a difference between knowing the fundamentals of a combat form, or even knowing its moves, and understanding it. The 7 forms weren't just mechanical sequences of stances and attacks, but complex combat philosophies. To understand the forms, one must first explore their philosophical groundings. In this new series, we'll be doing exactly that, starting with Form 1, Shii-Cho.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
Shii-Cho emerged during a time of transition for the Jedi Order. For millennia, the Jedi had used alchemically enhanced swords strong in the Force, but somewhere between 10,000 and 8,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, they started using new weapons, proto-sabers. The first of these early lightsabers were unstable and clunky. They were unsuitable for combat and served a purely ceremonial role. But as technology advanced, proto-sabers became a viable weapon, and before long, they surpassed Force-imbued swords. Shii-Cho was born out of this transition, and this was evident in both the form and its guiding philosophy. Much of Form 1 was adapted from traditional swordplay, but overall, it was much more deliberate and cautious. The Jedi Masters who invented the combat style were uncertain about the potential and reliability of their proto-sabers, and as a result, Shii-Cho was characterized by broad, sweeping strokes and a simple set of repetitive maneuvers. The form was a prototype, and it simply meant that, when other lightsaber forms came about, Shii-Cho was largely relegated as a training form. It was an ideal introduction to lightsaber combat and easy to grasp, though it was hard to master. Above all, Shii-Cho was a form of determination and persistence, which was why it was called the determination form. It was also known as the way of the Sarlacc because Shii-Cho required Jedi to be patient, like a Sarlacc waiting for its meal. Originally, this was probably due to the temperamental nature of early proto-sabers, with which Jedi needed to be patient or risk self-injury. This caution defined Shii-Cho, though it could be hard to detect in the movements of true Form 1 masters.
It is simple, and its simplicity is strength. It allows focus, a slightly improved chance of connecting with one's opponent. It has no other advantages or disadvantages. It is an effective form to fall back on when no other form will do.
Shii-Cho was extremely deliberate. In its raw form, it relied on only a handful of basic sweeping strokes, all at either 90-degree or 45-degree angles. All other moves within Form 1 were just variations on these basic strokes. Offense and defense were essentially the same within Form 1. The same strokes were used for both. This made lightsaber-to-lightsaber combat with raw Shii-Cho extremely basic, as you'd expect from a form that predated the existence of lightsaber-wielding Darksiders. During Form 1 combat drills, Jedi younglings were paired up, with one student given the role of defender and the other attacker. The latter would attack with Shii-Cho's basic strokes, attempting to push the other back, while the former would block with perpendicular strokes, trying to not lose any ground. At random intervals, the overseeing masters would order the students to switch roles. This changed the direction and flow of combat, but nothing else. Within Shii-Cho, combat was all the same. Because of its limited set of moves, Shii-Cho relied less on fancy blade work and more on continuous motion. Form 1 practitioners pushed forward as much as they could, relentlessly forcing their opponents to retreat until they were pressed into a corner. The form's goal was not to overpower an opponent, but rather to outlast them through greater control, greater willpower, and greater strength in the Force. In a sense, Shii-Cho wasn't actually about lightsabers at all. It was a form of combat discipline, a mindset fueled by determination. Shii-Cho was particularly useful for Jedi fighting multiple opponents. Its broad strokes fell short when fighting single opponents with plenty of mobility, but it could turn the tide in a more uneven fight. It taught its practitioners to manage their opponents, as its strokes were wide and usually overhand and made it difficult for opponents to spread out. Shii-Cho users forced their opponents into a more manageable box directly in front of them where they couldn't flank the duelist. The masters of Form 1 applied this philosophy to their everyday lives as well as lightsaber combat, managing whatever challenges they faced in the same way they would a group of thugs. The training velocities in which Jedi initiates practiced Form 1 only ended when the instructor gave the order, but out in the real world, Shii-Cho practitioners had to end their battles on their own terms. Traditionally, Shii-Cho users ended their duels with a move called Sanjiem, or a disarming slash. This maneuver was quite simple and involved either destroying an opponent's weapon with a precise slash or just bashing it out their hands. True to Form 1, this maneuver was a more precise yet more heavy-handed variation of one of the more basic Shii-Cho strokes. Shii-Cho generally taught its users to avoid killing or even maiming their opponents, though this wasn't a hard rule. Looking at the raw, inelegant slashes and parries of Form 1, you might think that its experimental origin and ties to traditional swordplay were all that defined Shii-Cho. But if so, you'd be wrong. As we said earlier, the Jedi Masters who first conceived of Shii-Cho drew on what they knew to craft the form, and what they knew wasn't just traditional swordplay. Shii-Cho was also deeply rooted in the philosophy of the light side, and since it was designed to be practiced by Force users, it was patterned after a concept that any Jedi would be familiar with: the ebb and flow of the Force. To explain what we mean, let's consider the following passage from the Revenge of the Sith novelization. This is Obi-Wan Kenobi in the light. He doesn't even need to reach into the Force. He has already let the Force reach into him. The Force flows over him and around him as though he's stepped into a crystal pure waterfall lost in the green coils of a forgotten rainforest. When he opens himself up to that sparkling stream, it flows into him and through him and out without the slightest interference from his conscious will. The part of him that calls himself Obi-Wan Kenobi is no more than a ripple, an eddy in the pool into which he endlessly pours. There are other parts of him here as well. There's nothing here that is not part of him. From the scuff mark on R2-D2's dome to the tattered hem of Palpatine's robe, from the spidering crack in one transparasteel panel of the curving view wall above to the great starships that still battle beyond it. Because this is all part of the Force. This was what use of the light side was like, though it usually wasn't as pronounced as this scene suggested. This sense of the Force was why Shii-Cho used identical patterns for defense and offense, and why it emphasized disarming instead of destroying, because its creators and users became one with the Force in combat, and in the Force, all things were one. Furthermore, the very strokes and parries used in Form 1 were meant to invoke this feeling. When practiced by a true master of the form, Shii-Cho's movements were extremely fluid, appearing to an observer like flowing water. In this advanced style of Shii-Cho, it was nigh impossible to tell where one move ended and another began. This was possible because of Shii-Cho's greatest strength, its simplicity. It broke down combat to simple, fluid motions, both of the lightsaber and of the duelist's body. Even though its moves were broad and repetitive, Shii-Cho allowed for a surprising amount of variability. Since it was so simple, users could easily transition from one move to another. The blade work of Shii-Cho masters was wild but controlled, random but fluid, and unquestionably effective. The philosophy of Shii-Cho is best surmised as a rejection of complicated maneuvers, a breaking down of the universe to its basics. Complicated structures were illusionary because the great stream of the Force flowed through all things, and in the Force, everything was simple, the same basic structure expressed in infinitely different ways. Shii-Cho sought to ride the current of the Force instead of trying to tame it, to embrace its most fundamental aspects and imitate its flow. This made true Shii-Cho, the Form 1 of the Jedi Masters, difficult to control, but also powerful in the right hands. That's one form down, 6 more to go. Be sure to tune in next week when we look at Form 2. But what do you think? Are you excited for the rest of the series? Feel free to post your thoughts in the comments section below. And as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.